Hello, everyone. My name is Elian Ramos, Gares, and tonight we have a celebration. We're celebrating Earth Day. This is the day where the global community has chosen to celebrate our connection to Mother Earth, to our Pachamama. And as the years go by, this is the 45th anniversary of Earth Day. But as the years go by, it's become more and more evident that one day is not enough to celebrate Earth Day. And one of the reasons for that is that communities around the world, particularly poor communities, such as the Latino community in many cases, are the ones that suffer the most from the consequences of damage to the environment and to the earth. And so, these are the communities that live near the power plants, the ones that breathe the dirtiest of airs, and the ones that suffer the most from the consequences of climate change. And so these links between the climate and the environment and poverty have been the subject of discussion by all of these different organizations that work on environmental justice issues. And so tonight I have invited some of my friends from the environmental justice movement, and we're going to be discussing, some of the challenges that they encounter in their work every day, but also some of the possibilities and some of the solutions to solving some of these environmental problems, particularly the ones that affect the Latino community the most. And so I have with me, I'm going to start from my left. I have Graciela Cabello, who is the director for Latino Outdoors. How are you, Graciela? Thank you so much for being here.
Hello. Thank you.
And next to Graciela, I have Kathleen Sutcliffe. And Kathleen is the acting campaign director for Earth Justice. And her focus at the organization is healthy communities. So she's going to be talking about the work that she does in that area. How are you, Kathleen?
Great. Thanks for having me, Elian.
Thank you for being here. And last but not least, certainly, I have Lucia Oliva Henley. And Lucia is a campaign manager for new climate partnerships at the Environmental Defense Fund. And her focus there is precisely the Latino community. So she's going to be talking about all the amazing work that she does there. So let's start with that. Let's start with the work that you each do at the different organizations. And, you can take turns whichever way you want to start. But, what you do every day is not necessarily familiar to a lot of us out here. So tell me a little bit about that. Do you want to start, Lucia?
Sure, happy to start. And thank you for having us all on this panel today in celebration of not only Earth Day, but also National Minority Health Month. As you mentioned, I work with Environmental Defense Fund, specifically focused on engaging Latino communities. Environmental Defense Fund has been around for several decades. We're a large national organization, increasingly with international work as well. I work in our climate change program at a national level. And we are really focusing on trying to understand and help promote and advocate for the solutions to climate change that need to happen at a national level for us as a nation to be able to address this global challenge, but to do our part. So I work specifically in trying to create some of the connections between that issue and how it does affect the Latino community. Specifically, we tend to look very closely at issues related to Latino health. We also do a good amount of outreach, and we build partnerships with different organizations that also have a well-established relationship within many Latino communities to try to support that work and also to help understand what are the issues related to air quality, what are the issues related to illnesses like asthma or to changing temperatures and things like extreme heat or rising sea level. How does that affect the Latino community? So that's a lot of the work that I'm involved in.
Wow. Very nice, very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Kathleen?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. And I work at Earth Justice, and we're a nonprofit environmental law organization. So our tagline is, because the earth needs a good lawyer, and we use the power of the law to defend our right to a healthy environment. So we have attorneys in 10 regional offices across the country, and we win about 50 major legal victories a year. And in addition to our litigation, we also have active campaigns. And right now, our campaigns are all primarily focused on healthy communities. We are working to protect communities from the consequences of the fracking-enabled oil and gas drilling rush. We're fighting to protect farm workers from pesticide exposures and working to protect all people from smog-forming ozone pollution. So those are a couple of the campaigns we're focused on right now.
Wow. And later on in the show, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, and to give people some of the solutions, if they're being affected directly by this. But now let's go to Graciela. Graciela, what does Latino Outdoors do?
Yes, hi, and thanks again for having me as well. We are really focused on building a community around expanding the Latino experience in the outdoors, and so that means a couple things. We're really creating an opportunity for outdoor and environmental education professionals to serve as mentors, and either through guided hikes or sharing professional opportunities for youth. So that's one component of the project, and then in addition to that, we are really focused on reshaping the Latino outdoor narrative, kind of creating our own story, and building a space for the community and for everybody across the nation to sort of share their own story for Latinos in the outdoors.
Beautiful, and it's so needed, right? I wanted to talk about that a little later on too, but now I want to go back to Lucia. And Lucia, and you guys feel free to jump in too on this question. But this past weekend we had a massive concert, a massive event here in DC, the Earth Day concert. Something that's been happening for many years. These famous people come in and there's music and everything else. But the main goal for the concert this year was to draw the connection, and it's a very strong connection, between climate change and environmental damage and poverty. As we know, obviously the Latino community is deeply affected not only by poverty and the issues connected to that, but also by climate change. But can you explain a little bit how exactly are these two issues connected and how they affect the Latino community since last year?
Thank you. I had the great honor of being at that event, speaking actually specifically about this issue backstage at a panel on climate change and its impacts on communities of color. So I'll just start there, which is to say, as you mentioned, poverty is an issue that does, in many ways, disproportionately affect Latinos in this country. To my most recent knowledge, it's roughly 1 in 4 Latinos in the United States who lives under the poverty line, and that's a huge number of people. And what we know about economic livelihood, those resources, is that when we don't have as many resources, we're less able as individuals, as families, as communities to be both adaptive to climate change so that we can adjust to, maybe our job is going to change. If we're outdoor workers, how do we protect ourselves better? We have fewer resources, whether that's education, whether that comes from the healthcare realm or from other areas, but it also becomes more difficult to be resilient in the face of something like a climate disaster. We know, for example, that extreme weather events are likely to become more frequent and or more intense. And so when those events happen, whether that's a hurricane, as we've seen growing in intensity in recent years here in the United States, or a massive drought, as we are now currently seeing in California, record-setting heat, as we are now seeing in Texas, all of those impact us as individuals, but also as communities. And when we don't have enough resources, or when we don't have as many resources, it becomes very difficult to think about what are the ways that we can bounce back from those issues. And oftentimes there's a lot of intersectionality around issues related to poverty or other arenas of disadvantage. So also looking at things like if there's individuals or communities who are disadvantaged from an educational point of view, then it also becomes more difficult to understand what are the changes happening around me, things of that nature. So there are, as you said, a lot of connections, but I'll pass it over to Kathleen or to Graciela to add on to those thoughts.
Yeah, please, guys, do go ahead.
You want to go first, Graciela?
Go ahead, you go first.
Well, yeah, I mean, Lucia obviously spoke so eloquently about this issue, and I think that there was this article and sort of a conversation that's been going on this past few weeks, stemming from a New Yorker article where the author Jonathan Franzen was sort of taking issue with the fact that everyone is sort of concerned about climate change and maybe neglecting other environmental or social issues. And in response to that article, David Roberts, a columnist and blogger for Grist and now Vox, responded that everyone needs a climate thing. And I think that intersection of poverty, social justice, and climate, it really is sort of where the rubber hits the road. And the problems that exist in our society currently are only going to be magnified and intensified by catastrophic climate change. So, I really understand and sympathize when people are facing day-to-day challenges in keeping a roof over their head and keeping their family fed. And it can feel like a burden to say, well, also think about this and care about this. But it's really incumbent upon our leaders, to step up and look forward and protect future generations, and for all of us to sort of acknowledge the huge justice implications of already intensifying these intolerable circumstances that we have in our country, in our world right now. So yeah, it's certainly we're living in important times.
Very true, very true, and beyond just climate, right? It's also the contamination, the things put in our food. There's so much that we could go on for years talking about this, right? But we only have 30 minutes. So, Graciela, do you want to add anything, or we can continue with the questions?
Well, I agree with everything that they said. I think that, depending on your region, the urgency is probably a little stronger. I mean, in California, we have a severe drought right now, and I think that that's definitely going to shape the way policy looks in the next, year. So, across the nation, it's the time people are spoken, and we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think as Kathleen pointed out, and all of you pointed out, actually, there's so many different aspects to these environmental issues. It's not just like one particular thing that we can focus on. But in your opinion, and because you are involved in this work every single day, what would you say is the most imperative thing that we need to be looking at right now, paying attention, beyond all of the other ones? Mm-hmm. Anyone?
I'll go since I didn't go last time. Well, I think there's a lot of urgent issues, and it's probably subjective, but really a lot of the issues are all interconnected. And so the one that's probably the most dramatic in scale is climate change, and reducing carbon emissions. I think that encompasses so many other global issues that we have. So I would say it's definitely climate change.
Mm-hmm. You guys, what do you think?
I'll jump in. There's that very well-known environmentalist who said that if you pull on anything in nature, you find that the whole world comes with it. And I just want to elevate a little bit what Graciela said, which is this element of intersectionality. What inspires me to do the work that I do is that climate change or global warming, which kind of articulates the globality of it a little bit more, really is indiscriminate in how it is going to impact us. I believe it's the IPCC report that came out recently that identifies that climate change is not something that will be happening in some distant future, but that it's actually happening on all continents now. It is already happening, and so there's an inherent urgency in that, knowing that we no longer have time to think about, what are the solutions that we can build over the next several years so that we're ready to meet this challenge. It's in fact that in this country we're actually a little bit behind, knowing that these things are starting to impact the people in this country and around the world. And so there's a lot of urgency, I think, in our work. If I can maybe speak for others for a moment, but feel free to correct me, that there is a lot of felt sense of urgency around that there's no time to wait. But I would also add in terms of elevating that point related to intersectionality and connectedness, that what inspires me about this work is just that there's this element of knowing that if we're going to address climate change, which is an overarching and major issue that's a large threat, we also need to be educating people. We need to be making sure that people have resources available to them. There's all these other things that come into play, whether it's clean air or clean water or any of the other issues that are very basic to us, our family's health, our child's asthma, the ability to be outdoors and not be at risk of a heat stroke, things of that nature. They're all very, very closely linked together. And while it can seem overwhelming, like what do we do? I think that just points to what Kathleen said earlier, that we are living in really exceptional times right now, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to really step up and figure out what is it that I can be doing in my community, how can I be engaging with my representatives, my congressmen, can I make a phone call, can I shoot off an email, can I have a conversation with my friends or neighbors, can I go vote on this issue in the next election? I think all of those are great options. All of it is urgent, but you have to start with what is available to you immediately, and there's a lot of ways of getting involved with EDF or with Earth Justice or with Green Latinos or with many, many others.
Beautiful. And speaking of all of these organizations, I don't know if Kathleen, did you want to add anything to this?
Well, maybe just to kind of put the question out to the folks listening or watching at home, I don't think it's quite so important what I consider the most pressing threat. It's what you consider the most pressing threat. And as long as you're willing to be active on it, then I think that's the most important thing, because what the movement really needs is active people who are willing to take the time to get involved. And, I work mostly in the anti-fracking fight. And, I became involved because they were thinking of fracking in my watershed, in the area where I get my drinking water. And so I felt very passionate, and that's how I came to the movement. But people grow and evolve. So now we have a whole core of anti-fracking activists who are now climate change and clean energy activists. And excuse me, I think that it's just, speaking of how all of these issues are woven together and threaded together, that people can come because they're upset about air pollution from a coal plant, and then realize how this is connected to this huge pressing global problem. And even though it's a huge, enormous global problem, there are local fights everywhere completely worth getting involved in, because it's all of those local fights that will help us build the power to really affect the major change that we need to tackle this. So that's all I would say. It's not important what I think, but what you listening at home, what you think is important and what you're willing to act on.
Very important. So if you hear these people, just act on whatever touches your heart. It's all good, and we all need to be doing something about this issue. Now I'm gonna turn to Graciela. Graciela, we've been talking about all of this work that is being done around how this issue affects Latinos. And you work on that arena, and you see all of you work on that arena in different ways. But your organization, one of your missions is specifically that to get Latinos more involved in the environmental space. Why do you think there's this movement? It seems like it's something sudden. I know it didn't just start, but why do you think there is this movement to get Latinos into the environmental work? And why do you think we need our own space? Can we just be part of the larger movement? Can you explain a little bit why that is?
Yeah, and it's not really so much about needing their own space as much as it is being part of the space. Mm-hmm. Like for me personally, I'm a huge outdoor enthusiast. So when I got involved with the project, it was, perhaps through mainstream, whatever the mainstream outdoor and conservation story was, I didn't exactly feel like I could relate or had a place to tell my story. So it's more that we're creating this platform to be present and to really just share the narrative and who are the characters that are part of the story, right? So with Latino Outdoors, we've gained a lot of momentum throughout the country because I think a lot of people we're looking for this space. Doing anything different, or that they're doing anything different. You know, there's the typical recreation outdoor enthusiast who is also Latino and doing the same thing you see on the Patagonia covers or the cover of REI catalogs. But then you also have people who are just really into gardening, and you know, or we have somebody in Colorado building a canoe. And so those are stories that perhaps were not being told through the mainstream narrative, and so we're really just helping shape that story, and not looking for an additional space, but being part of the space, I would say.
Very good. And I think also, like, you know, not to take away from what you're doing, but I think also that we are already part of the movement,
Right.
Even
right.
if we're not conscious about it, right? Because I know a lot of people who go camping and do all these things, but they don't necessarily, it's not necessarily in the consciousness that they're being part of this bigger movement. So
right. And that's a great point to bring up. It's not that Latinos were not part of the environmental movement. It was perhaps the way the environmental movement is defined currently doesn't align with traditional Latino you know, characteristics, or you know what I'm saying. And so, for example, like traditional, I would say that Latinos have always been part of the conservation movement, especially through food. That's how I connect a lot of my family, and you know, the things that we do to be part of it.
Very true. Very true. And let me turn to Kathleen. Kathleen, you know, you work on the law side of the movement. So you are our Wonder Woman, you know, defending from wrong, you know. So, but I know that especially in an environment that is so politicized, and where an environment where the media is giving airtime to people who deny climate change and all of these things, I know that that makes your work a lot harder to do, I bet. So what are some of those challenges that you find in the work that you do every day?
Well, so it's interesting because Earth Justice, I'm not a lawyer, but I work alongside really, really talented, brilliant lawyers. And so we use the existing laws, so Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, National Environmental Policy Act, and we sue to make sure that they're enforced and upheld, and that these bedrock laws serve their purpose. So in this like present day sort of gridlocked, corrupt Congress, we actually are fortunate that we still have a legal system that, you know, for the most part, and can help us uphold these important laws upon which our health and you know, the safety of our environment and public health rely. So that's you know, in crazy times like this, it is fortunate that we have a separate judicial branch that we can appeal to make sure that these fundamental rights are upheld. You know, but speaking to that larger point of, you know, this politicized atmosphere where we can't seem to really solve these major problems that affect us all, you know, I've seen some bright spots on the state and local level. So just last week in Maryland, our clean energy policy expert helped pass a bill that would enable and improve access to community solar. So if you don't have, if you don't own a home, or you can't install solar panels on your roof, which a lot of people can't, you can participate in a community solar project and still use solar energy. So this bill would remove barriers to that access to those programs. So those sorts of things are happening in the states. You know, in the anti-fracking movement, we're seeing a lot of local bans and local activism. So I think that in spite of some of our elected leaders, people are making gains, and that's really inspiring to see. And you know, I would just encourage folks, I know it's easy to kind of get caught up in the negative and where things seem to be stuck, but if you look, you will find people making a difference, and stick with them and work with them, and, you know, let the haters hate.
I love that. Haters gonna hate, right? Now, speaking of haters gonna hate, I know Lucia, you are working to help the Latino community come along, and I know that your organization fights for to push policies that are going to help the Latino community. What are some of those policies that you're fighting? That you go to the legislators, to people who may be haters, and push so that you can benefit the community.
Yeah, so unfortunately at the moment there's no legislation that's actively being considered in Congress that would address climate change at a national level in a very comprehensive way. And so what we're seeing at the moment is actually tremendous movement at, from the White House administration with President Obama asking EPA to really start creating the types of rules that will help protect our communities, safeguard our health, maintain and uphold clean air, things of that nature. One of the biggest, and what I would say is the best thing that this country has done to address climate change, is EPA's Clean Power Plan. This is a rule that was proposed last year that will be finalized this summer that aims to reduce carbon pollution from power plants in this country by 30% by 2030. That's a huge step forward. We know that climate pollution is one of the biggest drivers of climate change in this country, and so that addresses an overall problem, but we also know that in a lot of the places where we are seeing climate pollution be emitted in the form of carbon pollution, there are also several co-pollutants like nitrous oxides, sulfur oxides, particulate matter, things of that nature that also have very dire health impacts. Additionally, I would add that there's a few other things that EPA is pushing forward, and they're not a few because it's really a tremendous task, and EPA is really moving the ball forward on this. One of them is a rule to look at the energy extraction process for oil and natural gas and trying to determine a rule that would help mitigate methane emissions during the natural gas extraction process. Another rule that EPA is also working on is to actually update our ozone standard. Ozone is a primary component or a key component of smog. Smog is something that can seriously aggravate, exacerbate asthma symptoms, and so that's something that is that I believe is very close to our community when we know that we typically don't get as good of health care in the Latino community to address things like asthma, and so that puts us at greater risk. Even if our prevalence of such an illness is not quite as high, we do tend to see higher rates of hospitalization, in some cases higher rates of mortality due to these issues. So there really is a lot that we're pushing forward. And I will just close out by adding that I think it's very important, particularly for many of us Latinos in the United States who do still have roots or familiares in Latin America, to also see that these are the steps that will put the United States in a position to actually act as a leader on global climate change, particularly as we kind of go down this calendar path toward Paris, coming at the end of the year, where we do hope that there will be more action made, more agreement at the international level about really addressing climate change in a way that's going to help us avoid the worst possible impacts of this problem.
Very true, very true. And you just said something at the beginning of your comment, and so I want to ask all of you, now we're entering campaign time. We see all these politicians pitching to the American public to get their votes. What are some of the things that you would like to see these politicians addressing in terms of environmental justice? Because they're being kind of quiet on the topic, to tell you the truth. So what are some of these things that you would like to see them talk about?
I would like to see support for public lands, state parks, national parks. That's all interconnected as well with education and health, especially in Latino communities. As we know, many Latino communities are affected by the lack of green space. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I would definitely like to see at the top of the agenda.
Mm-hmm. And Kathleen?
Yeah, I agree, and I'd also really like to see candidates start talking about fossil fuels. We need to leave them in the ground. It's just we can't burn our way to out of this problem. So that's something, and I think it'll be really interesting to see how the Republican Party handles the schism that we're all hearing about between climate deniers and believers. So yeah, it'll be nice to hear some grown-up talk about this very, very important issue during the election season.
Yeah. And Lucia?
I'll just add, I think that both of those are, spot on. For me, in the past, the question has been whether candidates and decision makers believe in climate change. And I don't think that question continues to be so relevant. What I would like to hear candidates talking about is what they're going to do about it. We know that climate change is a problem. It's not a question of whether or not it exists and is happening. So what are they going to do about it? That is a question that I would like folks to keep in mind as they do start thinking about 2016, which can seem like a far ways out, but those elections will be upon us starting with the primary season in February. So really thinking about what is it that my candidates, my representatives, my local officials are saying that they are going to do for our communities. What are the green jobs that are going to be made available for my family or my child if he's graduating from high school or college? What are the ways that this candidate is going to help protect my health and help make sure that I don't have another emergency room visit with my child because of another asthma attack? Things of that nature. And in the meantime, I would also remind folks that we do have folks in Congress and locally who are supposed to be making decisions on our behalf. And right now there are folks on the Hill who are trying to dismantle what EPA is doing or trying to block it. And so we also have opportunities online at edf.org/Latino Health and in other places where you can actually send an email to your member of Congress and say, please do uphold the work that EPA is doing. Please don't tear these things down, because right now it really is some very important first steps to addressing these issues.
Very true, very true. And I think especially because of the fact that environmental issues tend to be spoken about in these very gauzy terms, right? You almost don't. It's almost like pie in the sky, but some people don't understand the fact that they actually affect you on a day-to-day basis. And so let me ask you this, Kathleen, because you work on justice issues specifically. What are some of the what is the legal recourse for somebody who is being affected by things like fracking? There's fracking in my neighborhood, or I live near a power plant and all of a sudden my child has asthma. What are some of the legal recourses that somebody may have to do something about something that affects them personally when it comes to the environment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it because our law is a very specific and well-honed tool, it's hard to, give legal advice, one, because I'm not a lawyer, and two, without knowing the specifics of the situation. But, I would say in general, what I've seen, in many of the cases that we work on, where it starts is neighbors talking to one another. And I feel like that's sort of the first fundamental step, before you file a lawsuit. You want to get organized, and I'll give you an example. I don't know if you've heard much about the crude by rail, oil trains, exploding oil trains that's been making the news. But this is a huge problem. We've got, there's so much to be concerned about. From the drilling of the oil and the health problems to the exploding trains to the air pollution caused by refineries. So you see this enormous problem. Well, there was a community in Albany, New York. And their part of the problem that they saw and they were concerned about was, these oil trains rolling through their backyard. So the residents of a public housing project in Albany, New York, got together, just started talking to one another about how concerned they were about these trains, their children playing on a playground so close to these trains. And one by one, they organized, they were able to pressure their local elected officials to enact a moratorium to halt the expansion of a crude processing facility. And Earth Justice, our attorneys are now involved in helping to figure out a more permanent solution. So I would really say that, the law is definitely a powerful tool, but we really need and depend on communities to organize and build strength and power, and then together we can win. So I would say, before you go out and hire a lawyer, talk to your neighbors. Because I've had interesting conversations with people who live in the oil fields of California who have had problems, called state regulators, never got their calls returned, and I asked them, well, did you ever talk to your neighbors? Did you ever try to organize a delegation? And they hadn't done that. So I think that's a crucial first step, and that's something anyone can do. You don't need a law degree to organize and talk to your neighbors.
Very true. Very just on that point, and we're about to reach the end of the show now. But I want to really make this something useful to people who are watching the show. I know that our community needs to have a voice in this, especially because we're being so affected by everything that is going on in the environment. So what are some of the ways, what kind of opportunities are there for Latinos to get engaged with the work that you do every day? How can they support what you do? What is your call to action for people who are watching the show so that they can pass it on in their communities? Anyone can start.
I would. Oh, sorry. Were you going to go?
No, go ahead, Graciela. It's okay.
I would say to just get involved in the local communities and figure out what's going on in your public spaces. If you don't have any parks in your city, ask questions. Why don't you? Have your neighbors get involved, and just be aware of what's going on. Be aware of the purchasing decisions that you make as well, that affect these other issues and farming and everything. So support any other purchasing decisions that would help, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And how can they support Latino Outdoors?
How can they support Latino Outdoors? Well, we're actually a volunteer-led organization, and so we welcome any outdoor or environmental professionals to help with the project. And even if you're not, we welcome to hear what other capacity you would love to be involved in. And also support these types of organizations that are looking to make those bridges and connections into outdoor spaces.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you can see on the screen, if you're watching this on Google+, you can see the LatinoOutdoors.org website is listed there. So write it down and go and support them. Kathleen, tell me, what's your call to action?
Yeah, well, we have a lot. As I mentioned, we've got the 3 active campaigns on fracking, on farm worker protection from pesticides, from ozone pollution. So I would encourage people to go to earthjustice.org/action. Take action on any of those. If you look at our website, earthjustice.org, you'll see campaign pages where we have storytelling materials. I think we live in a very exciting time when we can be sharing stories and educating our friends and people we're connected to on social media. So take a look at some of the content we have on our site. Share it if you're moved by it, which I think you will be, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
And you can see the Twitter handle for Earth Justice is right on the screen as well. You can also see their website is earthjustice.org. So go and support it. Also, you can find a lot of information on what to do if you are in a some kind of legal problem that has to do with environmental issues. A lot of great stuff on their website. And Lucia.
So you can do this right now on your web browser. Type in edf.org/LatinoHealth. On that page, you will find a lot of resources, blogs, fact sheets about issues like air pollution, asthma, climate change, the impacts of toxic chemicals on our communities. And I'm actually going to ask you to scroll down that page and click on the links that say, tell your member of Congress to support climate pollution standards, and tell your member of Congress to act on toxic substances reform so that our families are protected. We will be sure to keep you looped in as we continue working and moving forward if you do those 2 things for me by going on that site. I will also say that for folks who are interested in learning more about this, tomorrow to continue the Earth Day celebration, EDF will be online with LULAC and EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy. We're holding a Twitter town hall on Latino health and climate change, so please follow along #LatinoHealth. You can also follow EDF's main Twitter handle at ENV Defense Fund or at LULAC, L-U-L-A-C, and join us to continue the conversation. There will be more resources available there, as well as links back to other resources available on our websites and in the work that we're doing. But please do make sure to check out that website. There is a lot you can do just from your computer, in addition to all the things that my co-panelists have also shared this evening.
Well, you heard it, guys, and I'm going to be putting together a blog post with links to all of these different organizations, with links to this video, so that you can watch it in its entirety again. And and I urge you to please follow these organizations. Go to LatinoOutdoors.org, go to the Environmental Defense Fund website as well, into earthjustice.org. And please support the work that they do. They work so hard to defend our community and to defend the earth, which is very important, because as we all know, we only have one earth, so we have to take care of it. So I want to thank all of you. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Graciela, Kathleen, and Lucia. And thank you all who have been watching. I will see you next week. And remember, let's take care of the earth. We only have one. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.